thank you for tuning in. We have a very special guest. We have Nyla Innuksuk.
Got it.
Nailed it. Nailed it. So Nyla is here. She had her screenwriting and directorial debut with the film Slashback, which is an RLJE Films and Shudder release that is coming to theaters, VOD and Digital October 21st of 2022. Is that correct?
Yeah, tomorrow. That's right.
Awesome. Oh, that's tomorrow. Holy shit. All right. So Nyla, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you. I know you're super busy promoting this film and talking to people. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's thanks so much for having me.
Of course.
I've been looking forward to this. So thank you.
Oh, great. I appreciate it.
So we both have been able to check out your film, and we have a ton of questions, but I want to kind of like take a step back a little bit and just ask you a little bit about yourself. So I heard that you've expressed that you wanted to make a movie like the ones that you wanted to see when you were growing up, right? So what movies inspired you when you were growing up, and what kind do you like? What movie did you want to see?
Yeah, well, I mean, I growing up, like a lot of people, I loved Spielberg. So Goonies and E.T., Indiana Jones were just like a big foundation of my childhood. And certainly, you know, you kind of, I think it was easy enough for me to kind of imagine myself in these kinds of scenarios, like Elliot and his brothers, and me and my friends kind of had these adventures, and me and my brothers had adventures with our friends up in Nunavut. And so just kind of making something that kind of had the feeling of that in this place that I grew up in.
Awesome.
That's cool. So I'm gonna do a complete like spin around question here. So we're in the United States, we're in the smallest state, Rhode Island, but a lot of people don't know the political situation in Canada right now, and that's where you're from, correct?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure. Yeah. And especially within indigenous people. And I just wanted to like ask you, can you give us a little bit of background on what's happening politically up there?
Yeah, it's kind of a bit of a different scene, I guess. We definitely talk a lot about Indigenous communities, Indigenous issues within the politics of Canada. I think it's something that's a little bit more just kind of present in the conversation than maybe what happens in the States with First Nations or Indigenous people down there. And so it's, but I think that, you know, it's what's so great is that we do have a really strong, we have a strong kind of independent Canadian film scene, and then also public funding that goes toward, that can fund independent movies. But then we also, you know, within that, because we've kind of agreed to, as a country, that we should be publicly funding the arts. We also are acknowledging that there are some, you know, that there's also specific needs within the Indigenous screen community. And we've also just recognized that independently and created our own little festivals and institutions that can support our own efforts. And so it's really great. I've got lots of friends that make movies that are Indigenous, some up in the Arctic, some, you know, down south, basically wherever that's not the Arctic, we call down south. And so it's really cool to kind of see what different people are up to, making comedies, horror, you know, but different kinds of representations of Indigenous stories than maybe we're used to seeing on the screen.
Sure.
That's amazing. I love it.
So you referenced Spielberg movies like Goonies, and just hearing you say that was like, I definitely can see that influence in Slashback, you know, with like the opening scene with the kids and just the whole vibe of that film. So, but it's your story, right? It's not a Spielberg story. It's like your story of growing up. And I was just wondering, like, what it was important for you to highlight about growing up as an Inuit, because
You know.
I was like Inuit forever. I always thought it was Inuit.
Yeah, well, that's right too. So Inuit
Okay.
means plural, and then Inuk is one person. So I'm Inuk, me and the gals were Inuit.
Okay.
And yeah, and it really was, so in part, like I grew up being Inuk, and this movie is in part a coming of age story. And when I was working with these young actors and developing the script with my co-writer Ryan Cavan, we really were working with some of these actors that ended up playing the roles, because I had shot this proof of concept with some of the kids when they were really quite young. And so they've kind of grown up with the movie, but then I was drawing a little bit from my own experience, or a lot from my own experience. And then also talking a lot with the girls about what it means to kind of be figuring out who you are at that age, where your indigeneity plays into that. I certainly remember feeling shame in my Inukness and having to kind of work through that. And I could see definitely that some of the cast were still kind of going through that process of working through some of that shame. And you could see it in the language, or hear it in the language. They would say things like, "Oh, that's so Inuk," and mean it in a negative way.
Sure.
And then we'd say, "Okay, like, what do you mean by that?" And those would be really challenging conversations. And that was in part like kind of determined, are these young people able to kind of take on this challenging role? Like, can we have these conversations and do this kind of emotional work that will be required of them? And and they were also young too, and which is, I think, part of the sweetness of it. But then and so seeing the different ways that they kind of were navigating, and then how that affected the friendship dynamics, that was just like something that we drew from and pulled into the script as well.
See, you mentioned the part about shame, and I found that to be a really interesting thing, because it's just interesting seeing that side of the culture. And I wonder, do you think at some point that will turn into like almost a point of pride? Kind of like here, I kind of think about how it would be at some points. It used to be kind of like almost not insulting, but kind of shameful if you were considered like country. But now I think people kind of wear it as like a badge of honor,
Oh
like if they
yeah.
say your country. Do you think that shift will eventually happen?
Yeah, I think kind of this pride of place. I think that's really important. And so I think, and that part is I think, related to the politics of Canada and Canada's relationship with its Indigenous people. We had the residential school system, which happened in part in the United States, but it was something that really affected Canadian Indigenous people in a significant way. And in the Arctic, it was just because the communities were so remote, it was quite extreme. And so it was essentially a generation, or a couple of generations of people that were taken from, they essentially lived nomadically, like they would have for thousands of years. And then my father and my aunties were all part of this generation, were essentially taken from their parents and put in these residential schools, so these sent across the country and put in these schools where they were taught by priests and nuns, and made they were punished if they spoke their own language or practiced their own culture. And so a lot of these traditional practices, tattoos, drumming, throat singing, were kind of rebranded as devil worship. And so this has been this like really kind of tricky process of like coming out of that, and then as children being raised by people that really had a difficult and sometimes were not raised by their parents, that it is this reclamation that's happening. And it's so great to see when you see the young people, that when we were talking to the girls about the scene where they put on their tattoos, all the kids had ideas already of what they wanted their traditional tattoos to look like, because it's just something that we do as Inuit women. We just kind of think, oh, you know, maybe if one day I get my tattoos, I wonder what they would look like. And so when we asked the kids, they all had ideas, and so it was just so nice to see. And then when we actually were sharing the movie with audiences in Texas at South by Southwest, it was so great to see how proud they were to represent where they were from. And Chelsea beaded her own jewelry, and she asked specifically if it was okay if she could talk to the audience, who of course doesn't speak Inuktitut, but she was wanting to speak to them in Inuktitut, just to be able to, you know, just to share that. And so I thought that was so special, and to me was just made kind of the whole thing worth it, really.
Sure.
That's awesome. Can you throat sing?
Oh my gosh, it actually is a game. So I think anyone can throat sing. You're able to throat sing badly. So
Yeah.
What it is,
please.
It's actually a game between people. It was often women. And it's a laughing game. So you're trying to, it's a call and response, and you're kind of trying to trick the other person. And then the first person to laugh loses, which is why when you see people perform, it often ends with them like giggling.
That's awesome. So what got you into filmmaking? Just out of curiosity.
Being a big old nerd. I really just was like obsessed with movies growing up, and my mom really loved horror movies, and had me watching Hitchcock when I was probably way too young. And I don't know what it is about horror specifically, but also just, you know, being a teenager. I grew up at a time when great scary movies were coming out, and some bad terrible scary movies were coming out that I still loved anyway. And so it was, I think about, you know, having just worked with these kids that are from the time they were 13 to 17, and seeing how they're, you know, they kind of will try different things and see what fits, to figure out who they are. And for me, along the way, and scary movies were always kind of a big part of that. And so I was, you know, as a teenager, making movies with my friends and making my cousins get drenched in blood and dressed as ghosts all the time. And so then I decided to go to film school and did that thing.
I don't think anyone's ever said on this podcast before, I watched Hitchcock way too young. That's so timid compared to what most people will say. Like, I would say I watched Silence of the Lambs way too young. But like Hitchcock, I remember watching actually with like my mom or my grandmother, and that's such like it's such a nice way to get introduced to the genre.
It really is, and I just remember The Bird specifically when it was grade 3 at a sleepover, and I should say there's like the most terrifying scene of that movie is with kids that were our age at the time. So it was, I think it was just like this idea that we were kind of getting away with something by watching this, but then on top of it, it's also like encouraged. And I think just then, it just kind of scary movies she also kind of really built up The Shining in a way that like created such a lore about it that like she told me it was the scariest movie that had ever been made, so I couldn't watch it. And it was like, well, when do I get to watch this thing? And it was this arbitrary. I had an older brother who at 13 had watched the movie, so she said, well, when you're 13.
Oh, okay.
So on my 13th birthday, I go out and read The Shining, and I'm over and over again.
Were you disappointed, or did it like meet every expectation?
I mean, it's The Shining.
Yeah,
it's great. Yeah.
Did Hitchcock play a role in how you made this film?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I was learning every lesson in the process of making this, so I feel like if I had known what I know now, I wouldn't have chosen such a crazy movie as my first feature. It was really like, I was like leaving this community, this beautiful place, and I was like, oh, okay, so that's how you make a movie? I'm ready. Let's do this. And so I'm still like in that like energy of like, okay, when do I get to make a movie for real? Awesome. So I ready to take all those lessons and try and get better. So I was definitely drawing from different scary movies that I loved in the making of this, but it was also such like a crazy process, and just to kind of every day felt like a miracle to kind of be making our days and get this thing done. But it was great to be able to kind of draw from different movies I loved. Like I would say the Hitchcock movie that I drew from the most would be Psycho, and even just like the inspiration character, the man Ned Gein, with his skin suit, the skin suits, and that sort of thing. I was always kind of fascinated by that growing up, and so to be able to make those skin suits was so much fun. And I definitely, and Scream was a really big movie when I was a teenager for me. And so there's like a sequence where one of the girls gets chased up the stairs in a house. So I had to find like the only two-story house in town so that we could have a scene where she's going upstairs and getting locked in a room, and then having to jump out and land in a boat, which is like just a total Sidney Prescott move.
Yeah.
But it was like, we have to find a house with 2 stories that we can pull a boat up to.
That's awesome.
See, this is what I love about talking to people who make films. It's like, I love hearing those inspirations or those little things that they added in that maybe kind of went over my head. But now that you say that, yeah, absolutely. I see all of that. In my head, I had The Thing the whole time. I was thinking about The Thing.
Well, of course. Yeah. Love that movie. And definitely the practical effects. I love the whole look of the practical effects in The Thing. I love the campiness of it. We even had the bear. There's like these aliens. They take over. They take over animals and wear their skins essentially as disguises. But these animals are made up of all these tentacles. And so I worked with this amazing contortionist, Troy James, who can do the craziest things with his body. And we made this full bear suit for him to wear that when the alien takes over a polar bear. And it's a suit that was like this huge suit that he could only wear. It only like worked when he's like upside down and like backwards crawling, like it was insane. So it was like really uncomfortable for him and very hot. And we filmed like all day him like running down this hill. And it looked so cool and crazy, but it also just looked a little bit too campy and silly and weird. So we ended up switching it out with a CG bear. Mm-hmm. But that was one where I was just like, we really till the end were trying to make it work. Yeah. And then just I loved being able to kind of play around with those practical effects and in that way.
Sure. I should have done this a while ago. Do you want to give the listeners a little brief synopsis about what the film's about that we've been talking about?
For 20 minutes? Yeah, maybe that'll help. Well, yeah, so it's just this fun little weird alien invasion movie, group of teenage girls in this remote Arctic community that take on an alien invasion.
Perfect.
That was short and sweet. I love that.
Thanks.
But there was so much to this movie, and it was actually layered. Like there was a lot of stuff there. And one of the things I thoroughly enjoy, A Tribe Called Red, and the music reminded me of that, and I was like,
well, they did the music.
No, that explains it. And I was looking for them in the credits,
They're
and I'm like, I
credited.
don't see Tribe Called
Yeah.
Red.
They're credited as Hallucination because they changed their name during the pandemic. But so they did
I didn't even know that. Thank you for telling me that.
So even like all of the flashback music that you hear at the beginning, like those are beats that they created. And then we worked with Michael Brooks, this amazing, kind of traditional film composer, to do some of the he took essentially Tribe's tracks and then added some additional stuff to that and sent it back to them, and they made some adjustments. So it was a really kind of cool. They were one of they're friends of mine, and we'd worked together, and I got really sick before I made this movie, and Bear, who was one of the DJs in Tribe, we went and saw a solar eclipse in Portland, and while we were there, it was like I was telling him I'm gonna make this movie, and he was just kind of like, yeah, well, me and Tim, I feel like we could probably do something. And it's like, if you're asking to do the music for the movie, like the answer will always be yes. Like so it was awesome to be able to work with them, because I would be getting samples from at 2 a.m, and it would just be the most amazing stuff that I'd be listening to.
Yeah, they do really good stuff. And when I heard the music, like right away, I was like, oh man. And I was like going through the credits. I went through the credits like 2 or 3 times to see, and I didn't know they changed their name. So kudos to you. That's really awesome. That's super cool. Super cool. Tell him I'm a big fan.
Yeah, dude.
So I had one other question. What was the biggest difficulty making this film?
Oh gosh, well, I think probably just being a first-time director who never directed anything. I mean, there was a million challenges, but even that with first-time actors or actors who never acted before, and convincing people to kind of that we were able to pull this off. It was a tricky one. But I have lots of ideas, and I'm always telling people about them, and I could tell that this one was one that people responded to. And I shot this proof of concept first to give a sense of the tone and what it would kind of feel like. And then we just like worked to try and find the team that would help us make it, and convince other people that we could make it and pull it off. So that was actually, I think, probably the biggest challenge. But I'd done so that was a crazy kind of thing. But then we're also making a movie in a community that we'd been told, like, we've scouted this place and it's beautiful, but it's impossible to film it. And it was like basically true. This is like the most stunning place ever, but it's a flying community of 1,500 people. There's this crazy housing crisis that means that there's not enough houses for the people that live there. So for us to bring in crew and actors and stuff was going to be this big imposition. They only get their food sent on flights into the community, or else once a year on these ships that come in. So if in the summertime, like in the spring, before the ship comes in, like they have a finite amount of food supply for the community of the people there. So we'd have to be shipping in our own food and figuring out where we're going to be living. And so the only way we could make it work was, once I did a scout there and was like, oh my gosh, we just have to be making the movie here. We went to the principals at the high school and the public school, the grade school, and we asked if we could move in for the summer. And we shipped up 60 beds and mattresses and turned all the classrooms into bedrooms for our crew. And so every crew member, these are like people that are professional folks. They're out there like living lives with families. They all like had a roommate for the summer and lived in a school. It was so crazy, but the kind of people that sign up for something like this, they're just amazing. So we had awesome awesome people making the movie. The cast, they were all living in the school too, which was kind of crazy because teenagers are just hard to control under all circumstances. But when they have like the freedom to be around in this school, it's insane. Yeah, so it was like everything about this thing was bonkers, but it was like, you know, now it's just like, okay, how can we make sure that we're never in that situation again?
You know what? Kudos to you. At least you gave everybody a school. I went to Tennessee, and I got the director's couch. So that's what I got. And it was actually the dog's couch. So I didn't even.
Oh my gosh.
So there you go.
Crazy.
So a school sounds like a luxury.
Yeah, definitely. That's funny.
So you make this film. It's shown at South by Southwest. It's getting, you know, really, it's getting excitement from the people that are watching it. Rotten Tomatoes is giving it a great rating. I don't exactly understand Rotten Tomatoes percentage ratings, but I heard it's good. Yeah. So what is this like? I mean, and now you're doing, you know, the press and telling people about the film, and everybody's, you know, seems excited. What is this process like for you?
Oh yeah. Well, it's great to have the movie. I mean, we shot the movie 3 years ago, and so it's great to have it done and out. Yeah. And you know, like I said, I'm excited to do the next thing. So I'm probably like extra honest. I'm kind of an introvert. I would rather be spending time making movies than doing press and talking about the movies. But you know, having conversations like this is always fun. So yeah, it's kind of been a crazy, it's what's been really nice is the opportunities that I've had with the teenage cast to kind of share the movie. We just went last week to Sitges, Spain with for the festival there, and the audiences were crazy at the festival because they just love, like, anytime there was blood or a death, they're like going crazy. So it was just like so much fun for the cast to kind of be a part of that and see audiences, because I mean, you're just like, oh yeah, it is out, and I don't read the press or anything. I'm not reading articles or anything like that are coming out. So it's, you kind of are just like trusting that it's out there, that people are watching it. Yeah. And so it sometimes is nice to go and actually see it and see people responding. And then to have the cast be a part of that as well.
So you don't read reviews?
No, I mean, I think that it's important to kind of understand. I also to understand how to improve and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But no, I'm not.
I tell myself that I wouldn't want to, but I'd be way too curious not to. I know it. I would. It's like a sadomasochistic thing that I would.
Oh, that's really funny. No, I haven't read a single review, but I've sometimes in the group chats, like with parents of the cast or something, they'll like put an article and like highlight something. So I've seen some things.
Oh, that's cool.
And I'm kind of like, chill out.
It's pretty wild. You made it from 3 years ago, and then like, so you're like, this has been done for 3 years.
Well,
not officially done, but like
we shot the movie, and then we had to do some pandemic, like the winter stuff. We were planning to shoot in March 2020, and then we were like, oh, we'll just wait a few more months until things clear up.
No problem.
So then, that it really did kind of extend the post schedule, and then but yeah, the bulk of the movie was shot over 3 years ago, 2019.
So it's just interesting to me to like, it's out now and it's been done for, like, kind of in your mind, it probably feels like it's been done for a while in some aspects. So you have to like show this excitement over something, and you're almost probably ready for the next thing, like
excitement. And then also it's like, you know, I feel in a way almost like it's not quite a reflection of where I am as a filmmaker, because I'm like ready to, I've learned so much from this.
Yeah.
But I am also really proud of this process and proud of what we did. So it's been great to kind of see it get out there, and it's, I think, important for me just to get a sense of how people are receiving it, and you know, like kind of also just
what to keep doing and what to not keep doing, pretty much, because if
Yeah.
like they like what you're doing, then obviously you did something right, and you should try to continue
sure.
some of that.
Yeah.
But
But I think that I know, like I have a pretty good sense of like, I'm like, oh, I know what I could improve. I know there's like, you know, so it's yeah, but it's fun. I mean, it's also a painful process. It's like there's it to kind of be like kind of putting something out there
yeah,
and being kind of vulnerable in that way. But I am starting to just embrace that that's a part of life, being uncomfortable sometimes. Um, and yeah, but I'm excited to kind of be taking the things that I've learned and even when I kind of felt like my co-writer and I, we met for the last time before we went to go and before I left to go and make the movie. We met for one last time and to make sure that all the kind of the script was in the right spot. And then as I was leaving, I was like, oh, I've got this other idea. And I kind of just like mentioned like a sentence or two of like an idea of what I thought it might be. And he's like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then while I was up in Pang making the movie, we kind of were just exchanging emails about this other idea back and forth a little bit. It's almost like as soon as the one idea had kind of finished, it was like there was like room for another one to kind of start. Yeah. And so yeah, it's been and now I kind of am at the stage where that idea is feeling wrapped up and I'm starting to bubble about the next one. Awesome. And it's like, oh yeah, I should probably get that second movie made at some point before I start this third.
Well, we'll be looking for it.
Yeah. And you brought up an interesting thing, and that's what I want to ask you just to kind of wrap up. But like the vulnerability about making a film, especially when it has like a personal connection or like a connection to a way that you identify. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in horror right now. A lot of different groups are getting represented. We're making subgenres for different groups and things like that. So like, I don't know, you know, growing up, it was like horror didn't feel as diverse, but now we're getting this amazing diversity, films coming from different areas of the world that we never saw before. Just like, what are your thoughts about the state of horror today, and where do you feel like it still needs to grow, or are you pretty content with this?
Yeah, well, I love what's going on with horror right now. I think there's lots of really cool things that are being made, and I love that there's like an appetite for it. It's been interesting with the idea of race in horror. I can definitely understand as like racialized people kind of playing exploring fear and trauma through movies. I think I can understand why racialized people would want to kind of explore that space. And so it's been kind of interesting for me because I grew up loving horror because it was fun and cool and exciting. And so then now as someone who kind of does it is work and is thinking about scripts and ideas, it is, and then actually physically making them, I think it is more fun. And so at the idea of the ways that you can think about different stories and telling stories that maybe people wouldn't want to maybe watch a movie about this, but through metaphor, you can be talking about things that might otherwise be too heavy. I also feel I wrestle with the ethics of it, the ethics of drawing from either personal trauma or my community's trauma for fun, and me being the one that gets to be the main one that benefits. So I mean, but so that's kind of been this, you know, I made a script about it about the anxiety of that. Yeah. And so it was really kind of stressing me out for a minute, and then I just through this other project felt like I was able to process it in a way that by the end I was like, oh, do I even need to make this movie? Maybe just writing the script was enough. But I also think it's fun and cool. So
yeah. Horror is such a great metaphor for like so many different life situations, and you really can play around with it and do it in so many different ways. So I mean, why not utilize it?
Yeah, and we all experience fear and violence in like in different ways. It doesn't have to be like physical violence, like emotional violence, or even just seeing people get hurt. Seeing people get, like, we're also vulnerable. It's yeah, so it's I I feel like being able to think about those things, but in a way that's kind of fun and safe. I don't know. I think I still really love to go and go see scary movies by myself. Specifically because it's like, as soon as like the trailers start coming on and you realize like, oh shit, what am I doing? Like maybe a bad idea. But it's like that feeling of freaking yourself out, and then also in a collective kind of space. I think that's kind of what's special about it.
Absolutely.
That's really cool. Yeah, I also watch horror movies alone, so I completely get it.
That's just because no one wants to hang out with you.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, no friends.
I like, thank you for coming on our podcast. It was really an honor to watch this movie, and it was super cool. And a lot of stuff I identified with, so that was cool. And there was a lot of like stuff where I was like, what is that? What is happening? So kudos to you. This was really fun for me. Thank you so much for coming on. If you put something else out, definitely reach back out. Yes. Totally.
Yes. Amazing. Thanks, guys.
Can you tell people before you go where to find you on social media and anything else that you want to tell people before you go?
Sure. Insta Nyla is my Instagram, and /backfilm is the Instagram handle. I'm not on Twitter.
Okay. You refuse. You refuse to be on the Twitter. All right. Yeah. You're here first, folks. Everybody, thank you so much for listening. Nyla, thank you for joining us. This was really, really enjoyable. You're amazing. And we look forward to seeing much more of you in the future. So thank you, everyone, and have a great night.